Representative Katie Porter went viral again for dunking on an oil executive during a hearing. In fact, following her recent appointment as chair of the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on Oversight, Porter was one of several Democrats to introduce legislation last week that would raise royalty rates on oil and gas companies for the first time in a century. So I think that's, again, needed. Now, Mark Murphy, however, president of Strato Production Company, argued against that in a subcommittee video hearing on Tuesday, saying that, that's not fair. That's not fair because we don't actually get any sort of special tax benefits from the government. Now, laugh along with me, right? Because, look, here's the funny thing. Anybody who's gone up against Katie Porter knows that she does her homework, she knows her stuff, and she ends up bringing receipts. And so I want to show you this segment where she goes after and basically calls him out for his just gigantic lies about the preferential treatment of big oil. Take a look.
How much of those intangible drilling costs do you get to deduct right away from your taxes?
We get to deduct all of those just like any other business. We do not.
How much do you get to deduct?
There seems to be a misconception out there that you're operating from, that somehow the oil and gas industry benefits from some special sort of tax structure. We don't. We actually.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Murphy.
Other industries, right?
I will follow up with you, Mr. Murphy, but you do benefit from special rules. There's a special tax rule for intangible drilling costs that does not apply to other kinds of expenses that businesses have. You get to deduct 70% of your costs immediately, and other businesses have to amortize their expenses over their entire profit stream.
We also
so please don't patronize me by telling me that the oil and gas industry doesn't have any special tax provisions. Because if you would like that to be the rule, I would be happy to have Congress deliver.
I love the ending right there. Well, I mean, if you want that to be the case, well, I can certainly get Congress to try to do something like that. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Now, I love this for a couple of reasons. Obviously, calling him out for his complete BS and lies. I'm going to show you how they absolutely do get a lot of not just tax benefits, but also direct subsidies. But first, I just want to point out how it's funny that it seems like nobody in the business world is prepared to be called out. Like, have they not seen this happen before? Have they not seen how actually incredibly smart these women are? And again, Katie Porter, AOC, Bernie Sanders, yes, even Elizabeth Warren. I know a lot of you guys are pretty angry. You know, she's a snake and everything like that. But boy, when she grills bankers, I don't know. Yeah, I gotta love that. They're pretty good at questioning these CEOs, at least, over some lies and shady practices. So now, specifically, let me get into to break that she was talking about, the intangible drilling costs deduction. Now, that, of course, allows companies to deduct a majority of the costs incurred from drilling new wells domestically. So now it turns out it's a pretty big money saver for these companies, as she said, at least up to 70% of the costs. So how much does it actually save in monetary figures? Well, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, they estimated that eliminating the tax breaks for intangible drilling costs would actually generate an additional $1.5 billion in revenue. This was in 2017, or about $13 billion over the next 10 years, or over a 10-year period. Wow, that's not bad. About $1.6 billion. Now, think about that. And you could say, compared to other budgetary items, for example, okay, that's a lot of money, but it's actually not that much when you think about it. Well, understand that, though, there's not that many oil companies. And so when you kind of gather them all together, generally, that's still a pretty big chunk of change. These companies, there are very few of them, and they're pretty wealthy as hell. I mean, imagine that money, for example, being used, instead of going to the most profitable industry on earth, going to roads, bridges, schools, things like that. That'd be kind of nice. Now, that $1.59 billion, that's also not a lot when you compare to the profit margin, how much these companies make and how much in subsidies they get from the government. Now, these companies, and this is an outstanding fact, it blows your mind, right? According to the latest International Monetary Fund's report, around 6.5% of global, this is all, all around the world, right? Global GDP, it's about $5.2 trillion, was spent on fossil fuel subsidies. All around the world, we are subsidizing the hell out of fossil fuels. And that's, of course, includes negative externalities. And these are 2017 numbers. These externalities, of course, are related to climate change, oil spills, fires, explosions, global conflicts over access to these resources. That's an externality. And so it makes sense that there's so much money involved in oil and gas and these fossil fuels. And so that's a lot of money. I think that there's absolutely no excuse for these subsidies. And in fact, they also break it down by the countries that give out the largest amount in subsidies. The largest subsidizers, there's China, which is essentially a state-run corporation. $1.4 trillion was given out in subsidies in 2015. The U.S. follows behind with $649 billion. This is annually that is given out to oil and gas companies in the form of just subsidies. And Russia, who gives out $551 billion in subsidies. Again, I don't think there's any excuse to have these subsidies. Yes, there was a time where actually companies did need them. I'm actually not against subsidies for certain things. Oil companies don't need subsidies. At this point, no, they don't need subsidies. You know who could use subsidies, actually? Alternative energy, renewable energy. Okay, I think those subsidies at a limited basis for a limited time are actually justified and justifiable. Okay, and actually should be used as an incentive to, get away from fossil fuels. You should take those subsidies from fossil fuels, probably cut them in half, and distribute them among the different forms of energy, wind, solar, geothermal, etc. So that's what I think should happen. Until, of course, these alternative energy companies end up getting established. And that's kind of the whole point of subsidies, is to get them established and working on their own. Unfortunately, that's not the point. That's not what they're doing. These companies, these oil companies, gas companies, they are hooked on these subsidies and tax breaks. They absolutely love them, even though they don't actually need them at all. They're doing fine for themselves, but they still try to keep them because, of course, greed. Which is why Porter is doing incredible work and calling them out and pointing out how no, they do actually get a lot of breaks, and that should help, of course, organize people to call out to call their congressman to say, we don't need this. They don't need it. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.